Hey Fitheads, today we have on Bryan Boorstein. Max is zooming in. You may know Bryan from us talking about him all the time. This is our second episode with him. He is evidence-based hypertrophy training. We reference him a ton, love the science, love picking his brain every time.
Yeah, we fangirled pretty hard the whole time. And he came through. He had a couple of mind bottling, one of those ones where we always talk about this when we like grab our heads. He had a couple of those. The bar
Yeah,
speed one was crazy.
and
Oh my
the
God. It's just...
separating fatigue from stimulus. Okay, you just gotta listen.
Welcome to Total Fitheads.
Serious fitness for not so serious people.
Hi, Bryan. Welcome back.
What's up, guys?
So glad to have you.
So glad to be here.
Not just because your previous episode, but because all the times we bring you up on other episodes, our audience is very familiar.
I had no idea I was brought up so much, and then I listened to the episode with Dave McConey because that's my boy, and then I heard you brought me up, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, how did they find you?" And he goes, "I don't know, probably through you." And I was like, "I don't know."
It was Max. How did you? Well, it was probably through your account. I don't remember.
How did I find?
Yeah, do you remember? Oh, I know what it was. We should talk about that.
I actually don't remember.
You found him through the X3 guy. So he had an episode where he had on Dr.
Jake Wish.
Yes.
Dr. Jake Wish.
Did you get a chance to catch that episode with on Marconi's? He had a couple because he did like a follow-up.
Yeah, so I couldn't listen to the episode, but I heard him talk about the episode enough that I feel like I listened to the episode.
One of the best things I ever did in this internet space is I was driving one time and I was listening to my friend's podcast, and they had like a relationship podcast. It was about dating in LA and whatever. And they're talking about something and they're like, yeah. They referenced love in a way that was so insulting because neither of them knew what the hell they were talking about. And I was just like, I was yelling at my own car radio. I was like, you guys don't know. Hey, shut up. You guys don't know what you're talking about. And then I was like, wait a minute. I know these people in real life. So I texted them and I was like, hey, can I come on your next episode? And then I went on theirs and I like yelled at them a little bit. And it was the most like rewarding thing I've ever done in terms of.
How did they feel about that?
They took it pretty well. I referenced what happened and they said, because they would have people email in and be like, this is my problems. I'm a teen lesbian and I'm in love with my best friend, or I'm in high school and I'm in college and I'm in love with my high school boyfriend, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I said that the email was something like, because I'm in love. And as they were reading it out loud, they both cackled like a couple of hyenas at the idea that love exists, or that like love is real. And I was like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. They took it pretty well. But
they're just jaded.
Yeah, for sure. It's very rewarding to like hear something and then be like, hey, I know that guy.
And then insert yourself into it. That's like if Seinfeld isn't going well and then you just cram your way through the door and be like, guys, pick it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So you heard Jake Wish and you heard about Jake Wish because he had to do he got to do a Jake Wish episode, and then he got to do a Jake Wish response video. And then I think he had to do a response to all the commenters commentating for response. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I believe that occurred. So it was a multifaceted equation of him trying to talk about the problem with bands and why these aren't quite as good as weights.
I mean, it's interesting that he's built that army of people supporting him.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of the same stuff with many of the people, like the influencers in this space, like the Athlete X guy,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that guy, like, he puts out some decent information, but I would say like you pretty much have to look at 70% of what he says and probably just turn your head and not pay too much attention. And the other thing is that as your following grows, right, and you get up to like 1 million followers, you no longer can talk about nuance and detail of things, because it will just go over the head of too many of your followers. So the information that you put out has to be more general and easily interpretable by your audience. So I think that just by the nature of having that many followers, it kind of dumbs down your content a little bit.
I also think that's how they got to that many followers. Reaching such a wide audience. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword there. Also, I need to stop just clicking on whatever shows up first on YouTube, because I've certainly watched a lot of that, gentleman.
Yeah, I mean, just take it with a grain of salt. Use your smart brain when you listen to that stuff.
So my upper chest isn't bigger because of him? I don't understand.
It looks bigger to me. I mean, it seems like it's working.
It worked. Can we just make this episode where you debunk stuff like that?
Isn't that why Dave was on? Weren't we debunking myths with Dave too?
That's true. What's the most frustrating thing you've come across that people are peddling? It's all.
Yeah, I mean, bans are really bad. Like I had a problem with bans at the beginning of the pandemic period, where there was a lot of people just trying to make money and being like, get bans. And I get that if you have nothing else, like, bans are a decent tool, but they lack in so many ways that I would actually rather have had people invest in like 3 sets of dumbbells, like get like a light set, a medium set, and a heavy set, or get like adjustable dumbbells from 0 to 52 or whatever those Bowflex ones do. And then you get a lot more out of that, where the strength curve is much more natural. I think if I were to point out like one massive problem with bands, is that the lengthened position of the movement, which is like when you're going to be extended, right? That pretty much has no resistance or the least resistance across almost all movement patterns. And that is the position of the rep, of the range of motion, that science has been showing recently is the most effective range of motion, is that lengthened position. So a tool that primarily overloads the shortened position is not going to be as effective as something that's going to overload the lengthened position.
So should I just like hold a dumbbell in lengthened position and that'll be effective?
Yeah, well, there was one study that they did a long time ago to prove like the beginning of the proof of this concept, where they took birds' wings and they strapped like really light weights to the end of their wings, and they just flew around with them on the tips of their wings for like a really long time. And they showed the most ridiculous hypertrophy. I can't remember what it was, but it was like off the charts hypertrophy. So it would be like the equivalent of if you strapped heavy dumbbells to your arms and just walked around with them with all that tension on your traps all day long, like you would eventually get really big traps too. So yeah, I guess that's
how eventually are we talking? Because I'm willing to commit.
Yeah, I'm totally doing this.
I mean, I don't know. We got you're an N of 1 experiment, so you got to just try it.
Oh no.
I'm still laughing at really jacked birds. What does that look like?
Yeah, their wings.
Birds.
Their wings are just swole. I think
they're like, we're doing what now? What are we doing?
Yeah, now it's harder to fly. So
what about recovery? Wait, I wore ankle weights for a week straight, and all I got was knee pain.
Yeah, I don't think that lengthened any muscles, unfortunately.
Yeah, you need to get a bunch of balloons on a vest if you want to do that, Allie. We gotta you up.
Then it would stretch you from the hip joint, though. It wouldn't actually like target a muscle specifically.
So anyway, what you're saying is we should start selling really heavy gloves or really heavy like wristwatches, balloon vests. That's a good. Well, we'll just write them down. We'll start a new store.
Absolutely, sounds good.
So wait,
so you don't
how's
like
your
bands?
cut going?
How's my cut going? Cut's going really well. Didn't we actually last talk after I had just finished my last cut? So now I'm like cutting again. So the audience probably just thinks all I do is diet. But it's going really, really well. I'm down about 14 pounds in 13 weeks. And subjectively, it feels even easier than last time. I haven't really had a whole lot of hunger, like, occasional here and there pings of hunger at the end of the night, but that goes away. And then I haven't lost any performance in the gym or had any issues with sleep or any sort of like side effects of being grumpy, which are all kind of, things that you see as you get further into a diet. So far, so good.
Interesting. Well, isn't it? It seems like last time you were saying that your goal was to go to bed hungry. Is that still like the case?
Yeah.
And is that a good sign?
Yeah, I mean, at some point during the day, if you're in a caloric deficit, you kind of have to be like a little bit hungry. I don't want to say like you have to be like starving to the point where you feel like your insides are eating you, but it's more of like that empty stomach feeling. Like I'm not necessarily going to bed thinking about food and, oh my God, I'm so hungry, as much as just I'm going to bed without a whole ton of volume of food in my stomach. And essentially sleep acts like a appetite suppressant for me, where I wake up and I'm not hungry. So even if I go to bed a little bit hungry, I wake up and I'm not hungry. So given that I know that at some point throughout the day, I'm going to have an empty stomach for a decent amount of time in the pursuit of just creating a caloric deficit, it makes sense to me to put it in the last like 2 hours of the day, where I can just like brush my teeth, not think about it, like watch TV. And then as I get tired, I go to bed. And then that also allows me to put the majority of my calories around the periods of time that I'm the most active, which are going to be like my workout in the morning and the period of time from maybe 3 until 5 when I'm running after the kids and we're at the park and stuff like that.
That was always the biggest tip I had for people who diet. It's like, oh, you're hungry, go to bed.
Yep. Yeah.
Just that's it. Because in 8 hours or whatever, 6 hours, it's gone. I remember when I used to horribly diet, I would like dream about breakfast burritos and stuff like that, like bacon and eggs. And then I wake up and I'd be like, nah, I'm all right. A cup of coffee would be fine. And see you later.
Exactly. And then you just continue the fast and you're still in a caloric deficit. And as long as you don't go and like binge and overdo it at the end of the day, then you've done something positive toward your goal, right?
Do you extend your fast in the morning?
On days that I don't work out, I do. So on days where it's like a rest day, I usually will try not to put any calories in my body until noon or 1. And then that allows me to have like 2 really robust meals that day. Whereas if I work out, then I still I don't eat actual food calories until the afternoon, but I do put liquid calories in my body, like pre-workout, during workout, post-workout.
Specifically,
dude, they're all the exact same, man. Everything is 1 scoop of whey with 2 tablespoons of Gatorade powder.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've been reading that you were talking about Gatorade. Is that what? Just because you want fast carbs?
Yeah, pretty much. And it makes the whey taste good. So I actually like enjoy drinking my whey shake instead of kind of barely being able to get it down and then not wanting to burp it up the rest of the time. It's actually like it's got a ton of ice in it. So it's like this really cool, like sweet and almost, yeah, it's like a sweet Gatorade beverage with like a little bit more thickness from the whey. It's kind of hard to describe. It might even be a developed taste.
I mean, if you're rewarding yourself with that and it's a cut, like, good on you.
Yeah, so I have 3 of those. That's my my morning thing. When I have 1 pre-workout, 1 during workout, 1 post-workout, and then I'll usually eat at like noon.
I mean, that's not Whole Foods, I'll say that. I'm pretty sure that the Athlean X guy would say eat a chicken breast or something.
Well, in that way, I would say he's probably right. The thing is, like, we all have to find out what works for us. And I'm not hungry in the morning. Like, I'm just not. And also, if I'm working out in the morning, then it doesn't make sense for me to put food volume in my body that's going to make me feel like sluggish and slow as I'm working out. So the liquid stuff, it just like, I don't know. I'm just not hungry, but I know that I need calories in my body. So it's a way for me to kind of accomplish that goal and get the nutrients in that I need to fuel the workout.
It's a way for you.
I like that. That's good.
Anyway, so you just started a new program, right? It launched the next period or whatever. Tell us about that.
Of like my training programs.
Yeah. Well, I think was it LCK or you?
Yeah. So Paragon just launched a new cycle pretty much across all programs on January 19th. And the cool thing about our app is that you can just kind of go back in the app and start it on January 19th, like you should be doing, versus like if you sign up in mid-August, it wouldn't make sense for you to start in the middle of the cycle. So you just kind of go back in the app and you can start it from the beginning and get all the benefits. But all of the programs started new cycles. The physique program is doing a strength cycle this time. We kind of tend to alternate between strength cycles and hypertrophy cycles. And so we're in a strength cycle now. And then we just dropped a new program called 3D Physique. So it's 3 days a week of full body programming, because we kept getting questions from people on physique being like, I can only fit 3 days in. What should I do? And our common advice was always, go upper, lower, upper 1 week. And then the next week, you just roll the fourth session over to the following week. And then you kind of just follow that pattern, rolling a session over each week. The unfortunate side of that is that does decrease frequency per muscle group. So you're essentially hitting each muscle group every 5 days instead of every 3 to 4 days. Not a huge deal, but by providing the option of having the 3D Physique program, it just kind of gives you a different way that might fit a different type of person better. Somebody that can recover quickly between sessions. They can do full body on Monday, do it on Wednesday, do it on Friday. They don't have a ton of residual soreness. And then they can get their 3 sessions in, hit each body part 3 times a week, and get a bunch of benefit that way. So that cycle is super cool.
Interesting. So that's specifically because people wanted to train 3 times a week and not because total body has some other different benefit.
The frequency is just a way to split volume. And as you become more advanced, you can use frequency in different ways, because you as an individual might realize that you don't necessarily fit one of these generic models, right? So an upper, lower split is very, very popular for people through beginner, intermediate, even into the advanced stage. But what if you're doing like an upper, lower split, and you're finding that, say, your quads are recovering in time for you to do your next leg session, but your hamstrings aren't, like they're still sore, or you're finding that your chest is taking a lot of damage and isn't recovering in 3 days before your next upper body session, but your back has no problem recovering. So now you need to kind of look at your program a little more acutely and figure out how you might be able to utilize frequency to your advantage so that you're training a muscle group when it's recovered, not waiting so long that it's like, I did back on Monday, got to wait till Monday again to do back. So that might be like a little too long, right? But it also might not be long enough if you're still feeling fatigue or soreness in the muscle group that you're training. So you might end up designing a split for yourself that has slight variance to one of these just like generic models that are out there.
Back every day. So, okay. So then what are you looking for in terms of recovery? Is it just like, okay, I'm not sore anymore, then hit it again?
Yeah. So I like to think that you should have 1 day of not being sore, like no soreness. So a way that it usually goes in practice is like the day after you're pretty sore. Maybe you're like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And then the day after that, it dissipates a little and you're like a 3 or a 4 out of 10. And then maybe the next day there is just super mild residual soreness, but like you have to really look for it. Like you have to like flex your muscle, or you have to like stretch your leg or something to like really feel that there's still soreness there. So then I think it would be a decent idea to wait 1 more day to train that muscle group. But I also could see times where you could just, the next day you wake up and you're like, I'm 100% fine. Like, yesterday was so mild that there's no carryover today and I'm ready to hit it. But with that said, like I found myself that I followed that pattern of that like 4-day pattern where I would have no soreness and then I would train it again. And at least for my quads, which I've just kind of narrowed in on, they felt recovered, but they weren't improving performance. So every week I would like just match the same thing. Like I'd get 8 reps, then I'd get 8 reps, then I'd get 8 reps. And it would always just be the same thing at the same weight, no improvement. As soon as I put an extra rest day or 2 in there, so I had maybe 1 day or 2 days where there wasn't any soreness, then I go back into that session and I actually have begun increasing performance again. So that's something that I'm just beginning to understand for myself, because I always was of the mindset that as soon as a muscle is no longer sore at all and you don't feel fatigue in that muscle, you should train it again. And this is kind of counter to what I've believed for many years. So I'm still kind of experimenting with it.
We just talked to someone who said soreness. Was that, oh God, or was that Jake Rish again?
Maybe.
We said soreness was like not a good indicator of anything, and we were like, what? What are you talking about?
So
I
the only
it's an
thing,
indicator of something, maybe not.
yeah. So I think the issue is that many people think that you have to be sore to make progress, and you don't. You could never be sore and still make progress. And a perfect example of that is my back, which is probably my best like physique attribute. And it hasn't been sore in years. I mean, since the last time I did 100 chest to bar butterfly pull-ups was like the last time my back got sore. So like it hasn't been sore since I've been training physique style for like the last 5 years. And yet it continues to improve consistently and get better. So I very much understand whoever said that. I think Dave may have even brought that up on the episode he did with you guys, but you definitely do not have to be sore. I think where soreness has utility as something that we look at subjectively is if you're too sore. Because I think that if you're getting too sore, then now we can extrapolate out that you've created way too much muscle damage, that your body is going through this massive inflammation process, and it's allocating resources to repair your soreness instead of allocating those resources to muscle protein synthesis, which is the process of building muscle. So it's essentially breaking down muscle instead of building muscle. I think that there's a sweet spot in there. And I don't think you have to be sore, like I said, but if you're going to be sore, I think you should avoid crippling soreness, because if you get really, really sore, then you're not doing anything positive for anything.
Avoid crippling yourself. Got it.
So then you're not really looking to that as an indicator of success, right? It's tracking if you've added weight.
Soreness?
Yeah. Like you're not really using that as
I don't think, I mean, soreness, like it really does, you don't have to be sore. Like if you're getting stronger session to session and adding weight, then whether you're sore or not is irrelevant. And the other thing about soreness is that it's subject to the repeated bout effect. So if you just did the same movement every week, you would get progressively less sore each week, even if you're adding weight, just because your body is used to that movement pattern, greasing the groove, however you want to say it. Soreness in the bad form comes from people who are constantly changing movements all the time. And they're almost like chasing soreness, because they're like, I squatted one day, now I'm going to back squat, now I'm going to split squat, now I'm going to RDL. And suddenly like it's been a month and they've done 17 different leg movements. So of course there's no repeated bout effect, right? But if
their
you did,
muscles are confused. So
muscle confusion, totally. Very important. But no, for real, like if you just did the same, even lunges, which are like the most damaging thing, right? Like you always get sore from lunges. If you did lunges every 4 or 5 days for a month in the same like rep zone for 2 or 3 sets, you wouldn't get sore at all by the end of the month. But you might be doing heavier weight than you were in the beginning.
Interesting. So
what about sweat as an indicator of a good workout?
Yeah. Do you guys follow Coach Mark Carroll? No.
Well, now.
Give me a second.
He's got like, I don't know, something around 500,000 followers from Australia, but he does really, really good work kind of quelling these myths of sorts. So yeah, of course, sweat is, as I think you guys are aware, not a pertinent factor. It would be something that maybe you'd look for if you were training for work capacity. Like if you're trying to increase the amount of work that you can do in a given time frame, like AMRAP style.
Desert.
In the desert. Well, maybe the desert's too dry, so you wouldn't actually sweat that much. Maybe in the jungle. Yeah, exactly. You're running from leopards in the jungle, then of course you're going to sweat. But
how many sets?
10 tree climbs. But yeah, I think sweat is one of those things that like, so to be like completely real, I know I work out in a dungeon and it's kind of cold down there, but I literally can't remember the last time that I sweat working out.
Yeah, I remember noticing that too, because you're always wearing like ski hats
in the winter. Yeah, I mean,
and I'm like, what is happening? And you know, I come from a sport, wrestling, where our entire practice was built around how much can you sweat, because you need to sweat off pounds.
Yep.
And so I'm watching you work out in a ski hat. I'm like, oof, that's. I remember doing that, and the thing, you just wring it up. You know, you take it off, you just wring it out. It was disgusting, but.
You know what's funny is I literally hadn't sweat one time in that hat. And so I washed it at the end of the year and I took a little sniff of it and it didn't even smell. I was like, oh, look, no sweat for like 4 months of winter. Just wash this bad boy, get it ready for next winter.
The coldest flex of all time.
Yeah. I mean, I rest so long between sets too, man. Like I really make my workout, make every set count, you know? So I would say a normal workout for me has like 12 work sets, maybe 10 to 12 actual like hard work sets. Mm-hmm. And it usually takes me 90 to 100 plus minutes to do 12 work sets. So that's like a lot of rest.
Yeah. You're just listening to a podcast for the 20 minutes in between.
2 podcasts.
Well, you know, it's like you have a bunch of ramp up sets too. So like if you're building up to like a heavy bilateral squat style movement, right, and you need to get to 200, 300, 400 pounds, whatever it is, you're going to do like an empty bar set, then like a 95, then a 135, then a 225, then a 315. And like suddenly, like I say, I did one work set, right? But there's like 5 sets that lead up to that one work set. So it's not that those sets are hard, but they are time consuming. And then you do need to rest between them, and you need to change weights out, and like, I don't know. It's a process, man. I try to multitask as much as I can though. So I use that time productively. Like I'll answer questions in the Facebook group. I'll update Instagram, answer DMs, like just try to, if I'm going to rest, I'm like, I may as well use it productively and do something.
But it's,
you have a timer.
It's a productive rest, not like a superset.
Yeah, exactly. No supersets. I mean, occasionally I'll do like intensity techniques on like an isolation movement where it'll be like cluster sets. So I might rest like, 15 seconds and then go again, and then 15 seconds and then go again. But that would be probably about as intense as it gets as far as like supersets, drop sets, stuff like that.
We did one the other day. Allie, remember we did those 24s?
Yeah.
It's like the total opposite of what you're talking about. It's an old Terry Crews workout, and he did, 5 or 6 or wait, 6 times 4, 4. It's called 24s because you do 6 reps of 4 exercises, or 4 reps of 6 exercises, something like that. And it's a mini dead, it's a hang clean with a press, and it's a back squat and an upright row. And we did them, and you never let go of the bar. You just do the whole thing back to back to back to back. And I remember thinking like, yeah, this is really hard. I wonder if I actually accomplished anything other than like ripping my lungs up.
It did feel more like CrossFit. Yeah. Which is certainly not sitting and resting in between sets.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing about it is like when you choose really big movements like that, like something like a hang clean, and then you're doing presses or whatever, like from a hypertrophy standpoint, and like there's definitely good reason to do the stuff you're doing, but you're not like training a muscle. You're just getting out of breath using a weight as like a tool to get out of breath with. So that's fine. Like I think people often think that I like hate super hard on CrossFit these days and stuff. And that's not even true. Like I think there's a lot of utility in training in that way. It just is that people are using that misaligned for their goals. Like they're like, I want to get strong, or I want to get a 6-pack, or look aesthetically a certain way. I'm going to go join CrossFit. And that just might not be the best way for them to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, yeah, it seems like CrossFit is very focused on making you very good at a wide range of things, but everybody just sees it as the place to get abs. And it's not as efficient as what you're doing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for somebody coming from sitting on the couch and not doing any weightlifting, CrossFit's going to do a hell of a lot for them. Like they're going to end up getting phenomenal results from it. So, I mean, there's definitely like the good and the bad of it all, right? It
was definitely my gateway drug. And then now I just sit around in between sets like
How did that progression look, Allie? Because I feel like you were definitely more CrossFit, like last time we spoke and even prior to that. And so how has this progression for you looked as you've kind of moved into a different style of training?
Yeah, well, it was because COVID, I was working out on my carpet. I had a squat rack, but it was like, of course, I'm just going to start, not cleaning because it was the only option. And now it's sort of like, yeah, this makes more sense in terms of efficiency. I don't know, but this also leads me to talk about like periodization and sort of picking a goal in one section of your life that you're going to work on. Like you said about you're doing strength right now for Paragon, versus trying to do everything, you know, and actually efficiently working towards that one thing and then maybe switching to the next thing to keep progressing. So yeah, like how do you look at periodization in that way?
Yeah. So again, kind of coming from like a hypertrophy spectrum, right? There's a lot of ways that you can achieve hypertrophy. So there's a lot of different ideas out there right now as far as things that might be worth including in your programming, right? So there's this idea of kind of making the majority of your year hypertrophy work, which would be more or less like straight sets in the 8 to 25 rep range for the most part across like a variety of different movements. So you spend maybe 8 or 9 months a year mostly just doing that, probably deloading every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on your recovery ability and how much volume you're doing. And then the idea would be that there's reason to throw in things like strength cycles and metabolite periods. Metabolite would be, there's kind of two ways you might implement metabolite work. There's systemic metabolite work, and this is honestly similar to the stuff that you guys were just talking about with those little circuits and stuff. It's just that you would probably do it more with bodybuilding movements. So in a systemic circuit, you might go like a tricep where you go back squat to bench press to bent over row, rest. And so you do all three of those in a row. Each set is still hard. You're working close to failure. It's like a hypertrophy focus, but you're also doing it as a means of increasing your work capacity and your systemic demand, right? Then you can also do peripheral, which is for the local musculature. So if you want to increase your metabolite production, say, of your chest, then you might do something like 8 sets of 8 with only 30 seconds rest in between. So you choose a weight that maybe you could do 20 times. So that first set of 8 that you do is really easy. And then the second set of 8 is still pretty easy. And by the 4th, 5th, or 6th set, it's kind of starting to get hard. And then by the 7th or 8th set, you kind of reach failure. But you're reaching failure not because necessarily your muscles aren't strong enough, but because there's so much lactic acid and metabolite in there that you just can't clear it fast enough. And that's why you're reaching failure. So that type of training would be then to improve kind of your ability to flush lactic acid and make you more resilient. So that's kind of metabolite work. The rationale for the strength cycles would be that you give your body a different stimulus. So you potentially could develop some anabolic resistance to hypertrophy if you just always do hypertrophy. So then you take a break and you do a cycle for 4 to 6 weeks, maybe, where you're focusing on sets of 2 to 5 reps and you're not really getting a pump. You're not really accumulating any metabolites. You're just kind of working on strength. And then when you come back from that, you would be kind of resensitized is the idea to hypertrophy work. And you go into the gym and you're like, oh my God, I'm getting these crazy pumps again, because your body just hasn't like been used to that and been trained for that. So those would kind of be the 3 phases that I look at in training when I look at periodizing out a year.
Okay. Interesting. So there's no gymnastics phase.
Well, you know, gymnastics is essentially just a name for movements that are done with your body weight, right? So, I mean, no, we're not going to have a kipping movements phase, but there's no reason that you can't have pull-ups and push-ups and dips. And I could even see using like a strict handstand push-up in there. Like I could see myself programming that at some point. So, I mean, there is, or like I also program a lot of like toes to rings and strict toes to bar and hanging knee raises and stuff like that. So I do use a lot of body weight movements, but I use them specifically for the purpose of training a muscle in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of toes to bar, I hear you're training your abs these days.
Yeah, so I didn't train them for a couple months, or for a couple of years rather. And then I just started training them again, I guess less than a month ago. So that was one of the things we talked about on my podcast. My partner and I both, we haven't trained abs in years. And this is the experiment to see if our abs get better by committing to train abs twice a week for 2 months.
Okay, but define better.
Yeah,
like better at kettlebell.
No, not functionally. Nope, not functionally. We're just looking visually. Yeah, we just want to see more separation.
You're like a Ninja Turtle.
Yeah, I mean, that's not really a great look, I don't think, unfortunately. But like,
whoa! Speak for yourself.
You just go for that Ninja Turtle. Like you want the Ryan Fisher gut.
Yeah, looking like a power lifter, little little
Yep.
mass on top.
So
All right.
what
So
are you
then
what are you doing? One plank, a 45-minute plank.
he's been planking this whole time.
My brother actually did a plank challenge. He got up to 30 minutes. It was pretty impressive. Yeah, he started at 5 minutes and added 30 seconds every 3 days or something like that, and just went until he got to 30 minutes.
So it wasn't one time 30 minutes. It was like leading up to there. He was doing
Every 2 or 3 days he would do a set. So it was like 5 minutes, then 5.5 minutes, then 6 minutes, then 6.5 minutes. So it took him like a year, half a year or something to get there, whatever it was, like a year maybe.
insane.
Yeah.
What a great use of time.
Yeah. Well, so what am I doing for abs? I'm doing 2 sets of rollouts with the ab wheel. And then
On
one
your
day,
knees or your feet?
dude, the toes are so hard. Are you serious?
I know.
That's a trick question.
But I am finding the knee ones to be like a little bit easy, and so I don't exactly know what to do. One person DM'd me and suggested that I go on my knees until I get to the plank position at end range, and then I go onto my toes for 1 split second, and then go back to my knees to like do the next rep. So I may try to do something like that. But I've been doing 2 sets of those on one day. And then on the other day, I've been doing 2 sets of weighted reverse crunches. So essentially like sitting on the edge of a bench with my feet hanging off, and I put a dumbbell between my feet and then bring my knees into my chest. So I've been doing 2 sets of those, and I'm finally at the point now, like 3 or 4 weeks into this, I think 3 weeks in, where I'm not getting sore anymore. Repeated bout effect. So I now am going to start adding a superset on the last set. So I'm going to go barbell rollouts for 2 sets into a set of sit-ups immediately after the last set. And then I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet after the second set of weighted reverse crunches, but probably some sort of sit-up as well.
Are you feeling it in your hip flexors? I feel like that reverse crunch would just crush me.
No, I think if you straighten your legs, then you engage a lot of hip flexor. But if you kind of keep your knees bent and you're just kind of like going like this sort of thing with your legs, like your knees are coming up, your knees are coming down. I mean, it does for sure engage some hip flexor. I would say the more that you think about the idea of crunching together versus just lifting your legs up. So it's like your upper body is coming toward your lower body as your lower body is coming toward your upper body. That would be kind of the way that I would think to engage more of the abs and less of the hip flexor.
Okay, which would be the goal, right? You're never thinking about training your hip flexors?
No, they just kind of get trained. I mean, I guess like in a GHD sit-up is a great example of that. Like you really are training your hip flexors in that movement. You're not actually training your abs, but the abs get sore because they're achieving a deep stretch position. Going back to what we were talking about with the lengthened position and the shortened position, the lengthened positions cause the most muscle damage, but also the most muscle stimulus. So that's why in like a GHD sit-up, you're getting to that deep lengthened stretch position. So your abs are having to support your hip flexors in a deep stretch position. And that's why you get really sore from those.
Oh, it's making me want to get a GHD machine now. I'll just lay in it and do work.
That's right.
You have one? How's your home gym?
Me or him?
Wait a minute.
Him? Wait. I think he's over there.
I think Max is down there.
I'm in the dungeon. In the dungeon gym. How's the dungeon gym looking?
I don't have a GHD, no. I would love to, but I literally have fit the last piece of equipment that I can fit in there without it spilling out into my basement. So
a ring light.
What?
The last piece is a ring light. Mirror.
No mirror. But I think once the kids get older, I may just start building it out and let it spill out into the basement.
I gotta tell you, for any sport, a wrestling mat is really great. Kids love wrestling mats, no matter,
That's actually a good idea. I might buy one of those. We do need a wrestling mat. My son is a terror.
So wait, you don't look at yourself for feedback on form?
I film at least one set from every movement that I do, and that's the feedback I get for myself. I would never watch myself in a mirror while I'm working out anyways. It would be so distracting.
Who's that hot guy?
Hey.
Check me out. Yeah, look at those quads. Yeah.
But the other thing is, in all fairness, watching film on yourself is interesting, especially if it's from an angle that you wouldn't see in a mirror. And then when you're doing it, you're not sort of like looking at yourself, you know what I mean?
Right.
You're not twisting to be like,
you don't want to be getting out of alignment doing an RDL or something like, oh, that mirror's to the left, so I'm gonna do my RDL and keep that lean on, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, I come from the CrossFit world, y'all. You know we don't do mirrors in
No,
CrossFit.
why is that? I think it's just because people drop their snatches and can break the mirror.
I would say that's probably a pretty good reason, but I also think that like there is something to learning how to move through feel, because especially a novice person that comes into the gym, they're all like, I even see this at commercial gyms with mirrors. You always see people trying to look at themselves while they work out. And you see that example of that person doing the RDL and looking sideways while they're doing an RDL. And I'm just like, stop, like, don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself. You're not learning how to move properly. Right. But if you don't have a mirror, then the cues that you give yourself are all internal. So you learn how to move based on the feedback you get from a coach and then the feeling that creates inside your body.
There's been something I wanted to ask you for a while. Every time I see like your stuff, how do you coach someone to know reps in reserve? I feel like I always have reps in reserve and I'm also always breaking form, but it's the opposite of what you say.
Yeah. So the first thing is that if you break form, then you're already past failure. So you don't need to worry about being reps in reserve until your form looks the same from the first rep to the last rep. Then you can worry about reps in reserve. So that would be my first thought. The second thing is that how I program anybody that asks me that question of like, how do I know how close I am to failure? The first cycle that I do with any new client that would tell me something like that is that we start a cycle at what I think would put them, like, for them to subjectively be at something like 3 or 4 reps from failure. And then every single week from there, we're going to add some weight or add some reps, but in some way we're going to increase effort so that it gets progressively harder. So say that person was really wrong in the first week, and instead of being at 3 to 4 reps in reserve, they're at 7 or 8 reps in reserve that first week. It's a self-correcting problem, because if you just add weight or you add reps every week, eventually you're going to run up against failure and you're not going to be able to achieve more weight or more reps one week. And at that point, you know where failure is.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it just feels like I know I'm going to break down. So I guess like I should use that as the indicator, the form breaking down versus being able to eke something else out.
Right. So here's the thing is, like, if you're back squatting, right, and you are doing it right and everything looks good and you're just doing reps, eventually, if your form doesn't change, it's going to get a little bit slower for you to go from the bottom to the top, right? You're going to feel that rep speed change. If you fight to maintain your position and you don't actually change your form and you just maintain position throughout that gnarly, miserable sticking point, then you'll have a much better idea of where failure is. Because when you compensate form and break form, you're doing that so that you can get through that sticking point easier. You're creating a leverage that now, instead of being 1 rep from failure with perfect form, you're now 4 reps from failure with shitty form. So that's why it kind of gets ambiguous. If you just fight through that sticking point, but it takes you 2 or 3 seconds to get through it, I have a feeling you'd get to the top of that rep and be like, yep, that was about 0 to 1 reps from failure. Or you could go back down and you could try again, but don't let yourself compensate to get through the sticking point. Like, either go, and if you make it, then that's probably your failure rep. Like, it's probably going to be harder than the prior rep. And if you do compromise form, then you also know that you're past your failure rep. So now you've hit failure.
Yeah. Do you think about that bar speed at all? Or is that like you're okay with slowing down as long as you keep good form?
I want to slow down.
Really?
with good form. That's how you know that you're approaching failure. Do you guys know who Jeff Nippard is?
Yeah.
The YouTuber. Mm-hmm. So he put out a video maybe 2 months ago that was exactly this whole idea. Like, I'd really recommend you watch it. It's him taking about 10 different movements to failure, and he has a rep timer that goes off. Yeah. So his first rep of whatever movement you're doing, the first rep is 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, right? Every rep is 1 second. And then when you get to about 3 or 4 reps from failure, you'll see that 1 second jump. So it'll go from like 1 to 1.3 or 1.4 or something like that. Then the next rep is like 1.8 or 1.9. And then the next rep is like double or 2.5 times what the first rep was. And for most people, that's your failure rep. Like as soon as your rep speed doubles or 2.5 times what it was in the beginning, you probably don't have another rep left without compromising form. If you do, it's going to be a 7-second grinder. So it's going to go from like 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 to 7 seconds. And like that you're just at failure at that point. Like there is nothing else to do. Right.
Yeah.
So I want to see that rep speed slow. What?
I'm having so much PTSD right now. You know, that like barbell bench that you did in college. You're like, yeah, it's going.
Right. And you know, that's the same thing. So the physiological response of what happens in a 1 rep max is the same physiological response that happens on your 10th rep to failure. Like it's the same thing. The bar speed is going to go the same when you're at failure on your 10th rep as when you're at failure on your first rep. So that's exactly what you want to see happen to show that you're actually approaching failure.
Oh, okay. Gotta work in my form. Oh yeah, and you opened my mind to this too. Between 9 and 10 on my back squat, I am breathing for a good 5 minutes, checking Instagram, and then putting my 10th rep in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Like standardizing your stimulus and tracking?
Yeah, for sure. So the post that you're referencing is the one I put up today. Mm-hmm. Where I referenced an avatar, which is a pretty common person who is going after, call it an 8 rep max set of back squats. So the first, call it 5 reps, you're getting pretty well. You know, you're sitting down, you're standing up, you're taking 1 breath at the top, and you're seeing consistent rest periods at the top of each rep, 1-2 seconds, something like that. But then maybe that 5th rep starts to get hard, right? So that 5th rep, maybe your rep speed doubles. So instead of being a 1-second rep, that 5th rep is a 2-second rep. And so you stand up and you're like, whoa, that was harder than it should have been. Let me take a second. So you're sitting there standing at the top of the rep and you're like, okay, I can do 6 now. I can do 6, right? So then you take that big breath, you descend down. This time you stand up and it's just as slow as the last one, maybe even a little slower. And you're like, all right, I'm really going to need to really focus for this one. Right. And now you're standing there and it's like 5 or 10 seconds and you go down and then you stand up again and it's even harder. And you're like, okay, that's 7, but I got to get 8 because I told myself I was going to get 8, right? It's 8. So you stand there and it's like 10 seconds and you're hyperventilating at the top of the rep and your boys are like urging you on, like, you got this, bro, you got this. Right. And then you go down and you don't know if you're coming back up, but you do. And it takes you like 7 seconds. Right. And then you rack the bar and your boy's like, you totally got 9 next week. Boom. So that's the avatar. That's the person that just constantly uses these excessively long breathers at the top of reps as a way of extending the set. So we have a couple problems with this. One is we don't have consistent data. So even if you do go back into the gym next week and say you take 15 seconds at the top of your rep after the 8th one, and you do get that 9th rep, do we really feel like you made progress? What I would much rather see is person take 1 breath at the top of every rep. So you do that 5th rep where it started to slow, but you go up, you take 1 breath, you go back down, this is going to suck, but you come back up for that 6th rep. And maybe it takes 2, 3, 4 seconds because you don't break form and because you didn't give yourself excessive rest at the top. But now you know that you did 6 reps and that was a legit set of 6. You know that if you get 7 reps the next week, or if you get 6 reps with more weight the next week, you know that you actually made progress because you weren't just creating this facade by taking longer rest periods at the top of the rep. So that would be, I think, my initial spiel on that. And I could go on further, but yeah, any thoughts?
It's interesting because months ago, I knew I was this avatar and I felt like this feels like I'm doing something wrong, and asked my personal trainer about this. I was doing a powerlifting program and she was like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. Like completely threw it out, and was like, yeah. And if it helps you get more weight on the bar and that you're putting more volume into your workout, then keep doing it. I'm fine with it. And I just sort of threw out the idea that for some reason I shouldn't be doing that, but what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so I think there is one way where you could use it. And I've seen other people, and I've used this myself, where say you allow yourself one rep where you take extra breaths. So maybe you do that like sixth rep with only one breath, after the fifth rep, and you get the sixth one, but it's really, really hard. So then you just tell yourself that every week I'm going to take one rep where I allow myself 4 breaths or whatever. So you do your sixth the normal way, and then you stand up and you're like, okay, when you do your 4 breaths and you go back down and you get another rep and then you rack it, and that's fine. And then the next week, same idea. You do your reps all the way until you get to that final rep. And then you're like, okay, this one rep, I'm going to give myself 4 breaths, right? But now you're doing it in a manner that allows you to have consistent data so that you're doing the exact same thing week to week. The one downside, I think, to extending sets with breathers like that is that you're dramatically tipping the scales in the wrong direction for the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So every movement has this inside of it inherently. Every movement has some stimulus that you get and some fatigue that you get. And in the pursuit of hypertrophy specifically, you want to create as many movements in your program that have a high stimulus. And if you're going to have movements with a high fatigue, then you have to be aware of that and you have to compensate your programming around that. Taking a set of back squats to the point where you're doing all these excessive breaths at the top is taking you deeper and deeper and deeper into the fatigue spectrum, your central nervous system, your systemic fatigue, the stuff that's really hard to recover from. That's getting taxed really bad, but you're not getting a coordinated increase in stimulus because you're literally just standing there with a bar on your back. Your quads, your legs, your glutes, they're not under load. They're actually actively resting while the rest of your body is getting fatigued. So I just think it just doesn't have a lot of benefit, especially if your goal is to train long-term. Like maybe if you're on like let me create as much progress as I can in 8 weeks. And then I just want to have my body break down. And I don't care if I do this when I'm 60 type thing or 50 or whatever it is, then sure, go do all the things. But I'm at a point where like, I feel like training optimally for the long term is better for the short term too, because my body doesn't hurt all the time. And to me, that's super important as well.
Man, this idea of separating stimulus and fatigue is now blowing my mind. Bush told us that fatigue is the only thing you should be chasing, which we've already established. I shouldn't be listening to him.
That is every single gym experience of college and sports or any sport team I was on. It's exactly like what you're talking about, but it also, unfortunately, it lends to the idea of like, who's got these ideas? Who's coming up with these ideas? Who's telling us what to do? Oh, it's just that guy. Where did he get it from? His brother. And where did he get it from? Some other guy, and no one's like stopping to think about what are we doing and how are we doing this? You know what I mean?
It's a work hard mentality. I mean, I think that like when you look at the general population of people that work out and you realize that you go into most commercial gyms and you see people underworking versus overworking, it's the rare person that is sitting there and taking a set of back squats to the point that they're hyperventilating at the top of the 8th rep. That's not like a common sight, right? Like we might see that relatively commonly because of who we are and who we associate with, but like this isn't common practice. So it's kind of like a message, I think, that is out there because of this natural inclination of people to undertrain, that there's this overcompensation, this over rotation the other way of like, just fucking work hard no matter what,
Yes, that makes sense. Everyone's lazy, so just tell them push it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to go like 8 reps from failure or you're going to go 3 reps past failure, you're probably going to get better results going 3 reps past failure, but neither one is optimal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of evidence-based training, how's your podcast going?
Podcast is great. We just interviewed the first guest that made me nervous the other day. So that was cool.
He was so buff and intimidating.
Yeah, that's exactly why. Yeah, so many steroids. No. So Dr. Eric Helms, do you know this guy?
No.
He's the chief science officer and one of the founding members of 3DMJ, which is probably the premier like natural bodybuilding and powerlifting coaching company in the country.
Oh, cool.
So you should follow them on Instagram. They put out a lot of really good content. So he's the chief science officer for 3DMJ. And I've been following his stuff for a really long time. He was somebody that was an influence to me during my transition period out of CrossFit and kind of into the evidence-based physique space. And I've listened to so many podcasts with him on there. So being able to interview him and ask him the questions that I really wanted to ask him was super cool experience. And he gave great answers. And I think that I feel like a lot more confident going into interviews of other people that I really have a high level of respect for too.
That's awesome. It seems like if you'd heard everything he'd done, that you would have already had like the answers, like, but he hadn't touched on stuff that you really wanted to know about and you dug in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he probably has touched on most of this stuff in some capacity on other podcasts and in his books and on his own podcasts and stuff like that. But it's kind of like the way that I get to ask the questions. Like one of the things that I was really curious about, or two things, the main two topics were training volume throughout training age. So like how your training volume changes from novice, intermediate, advanced, and kind of what factors might influence that. So one of the questions I really wanted to ask was how much what you guys were talking about with Dave, intent. How much does intent or accuracy or quality of movement or any of these things, how much does that play into how much volume you might need as an advanced athlete? Like if you get really, really good at performing movement such that you're so much better at it than you were, 5 years ago and 5 years before that, and you're able to create like deeper inroads of fatigue into your muscles with each set, might that warrant you doing less sets total? So that was one of my big questions. And then I also wanted to discuss a lot about the lengthened muscle overload stuff that I alluded to with you guys, because there was a new study that just came out where they had people do leg extensions. I think there were 3 groups, and one group did a full range of motion, like just the normal full pattern of the leg extension. One group only did the top portion where it gets like really hard and you feel the contraction in your quad. And then one group only did the bottom portion where they go from like the stretch position to like halfway up and then back down again. And that study showed conclusively that the lengthened position group outperformed in hypertrophy, outperformed the other 2 groups, including the full range of motion group. So I was really curious about that. And I was curious about that mostly from the perspective of how that might apply to something like back training. Because if you think about every single back movement that you do, whether it's like a bent over row or a pull up or a pull down, the hardest point of any back movement is the point right when it gets to your chest or to your stomach, right? So how many more reps do you think you could do if instead of stopping the set when you could no longer get it to your stomach, what if you stopped the set when you could no longer get it halfway? Like you could probably get 7 more reps on every back movement, but you stop because you can no longer get it to your abdomen, right? But you're now not training the area that's been shown to be the most important area to train. So I was really curious about his thoughts on that too. And then we dug into a bunch of other stuff as well.
Whoa. So wait, the lengthened portion of a pull movement is the easiest though, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's the part that like when you fail a row, why do you fail the row?
It's right here. But I'm trying to think of other movements where the lengthened portion is actually the hardest. Or is that not the case?
Movements where the lengthened portion are the hardest are going to be extremely damaging movements like an RDL. So think at an RDL, you're hinging at the hip and you're creating the hardest portion of the movement is at the bottom, because when you stand up, there's no resistance. Right. So the hardest portion's at the bottom. So in that movement, there would be no use in training just the bottom portion because it's already really hard there. The utility of training the bottom portion is primarily going to be on movements where they're the hardest in the short position, because now you have all this lengthened position that you could still be training, but it's not being trained.
Right. So are you going to start experimenting with that then?
I have been already. Yeah. I've been doing it for weeks now. Yeah. I pretty much do partial reps at the end of sets on all back movements now, at least my last back movement. So I don't want to create all this fatigue usually in the first movement. So if I'm doing like a row and then I'm going to a pull down, I probably wouldn't do it on the row because then that would impact my pull down, but I will do it on the pull down because that's like my last back movement.
Dang, that's so counter to everything I've been thinking, especially lately. I'm working on getting a muscle up and this is where I suck. So I've just been focusing on like ISO holds here and whatever, but I should.
Well, are you doing a kipping muscle up?
No, trying to do strict.
Yeah. So the reason you're getting stuck there isn't because you're weak. It's just because of the transition.
Yeah.
The hardest part of a pull-up is still going to be the bottom portion. You're just strong enough to get here. The reason you're failing the muscle up is probably because you're in too tight here. Like you're probably in here like this, and you need to be back like this because you need to be able to create leverage so that you can throw your body over the rings, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that this necessarily applies to things like the pursuit of a muscle up. I mean, that's a very complicated technical movement. This is probably more specific to things that are going to be like hypertrophy based focus. Yeah.
And wait, what did he say about training age and like reducing your volume?
Yeah, he wasn't super ready to commit to that. I mean, he definitely said that there is something to making sure that you're doing your movements perfectly. Like he co-signed on the idea of like, you know, rep execution should be the same from the first rep to the last rep. Like you shouldn't be compensating. But he was like, you know, if you do a perfect back squat and you get knee flexion and you get your ass to grass and then you stand up without compromising your form, he's like, you're training your quads. Like, he's like, I don't know that there's that much more to like, I'm going to be, you know, really making a mind muscle connection with my quads as I'm descending and then really trying to like stretch them at the bottom and then explode up from the bottom only with my quads. He's like, if you're just like making sure your form is good and there's no deviation in form, then you're training the quads and it's probably not that important. But I would say that I think that the problem is that most people don't keep their form the same. So one of the things about intent is that it goes into form consistency. Like you're intending on keeping, like it's a very important aspect for you to keep your form identical set to set. So there is an intent there, even if the intent isn't necessarily like muscularly specific. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, awesome. We already asked you the alcohol question. I remember your story about CrossFitting drunk. Have you?
Oh my God, that's so good.
You've gotten rid of alcohol, I'm assuming, for your cut, or?
Yeah, I mean, so I took a 2-week diet break when I was in Wisconsin for middle of June. I was on vacation for 2 weeks, and my intention was just to eat at maintenance for those 2 weeks, but it got a little carried away. So I had a couple nights of eating like, you know, fried cheese curds and like chicken fingers. And they bought it was my wife's birthday while I was there. So they bought one of those like Dairy Queen cakes, which I didn't grow up on. So I'd never had one before. And it was just like, it was just there. Like it was just there in the freezer. And so every time I walked by it, I like took a bite of it. And so by the end of the trip, it was like, the scale said that I was 7 pounds heavier, but I wasn't actually, because within 3 days, like 5 pounds of that dropped off. So I probably gained like 2 pounds over the 2 weeks, which means I definitely was not eating at maintenance. Cause that's like an additional 500 calories a day, essentially. But I did drink during that period too. I had 3 days in a row where I drank, and I think I had a total of 6 drinks over 3 days.
But you got back on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's really how it goes, right? So the coolest thing about dieting, if you don't have a deadline, is that you can do things like that. Like you can take these deviations and these paths, and you can kind of, if you're feeling hungry, you can take 2 weeks and just eat. Or like you're going on a social event with your friends, like go get drunk and have fun for a week and just realize that you set yourself back, but like you don't have a deadline. So who cares?
Right.
Do you think there will be a deadline in the future? Weren't you thinking about, isn't this the test for if you're going to compete, or? Yeah,
this is the test cut. So last cut, I got down to 185 and I felt pretty good about that, but I don't think that it gave me the insight that I wanted as like how much further I would have to go if I were to compete. So this time my goal is to go low enough that I have an idea of how much lower I would have to go. I think that number will be in the low 180s. So kind of the number in my head is like 182, maybe 181.5, something like that. I think if I can get down there, then at least I'll be able to say I can get on stage in 10 more pounds, or I would need more than 10 more pounds. And if it's going to be more than 10 more pounds, then I think I'm probably not going to compete. And if I can get on stage at 172 to 175 range, then I think that would be something that I'm going to do in 2022.
Solid. All right. Well, I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah. You know, just keep following my workouts from the dungeon, and we'll see if I keep adding muscle or not.
Love it. Okay, so where should the fitheads go to find you and your podcast too?
Podcast is Eat, Train, Prosper. We're on all the major providers and YouTube, although no one really watches it on YouTube. How do you guys find about that? Do you get mostly on YouTube, or is it from providers too, or a mix of both?
It's more on YouTube, but that's just because like that is our
right
where we started, you know.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Interesting.
Wait, I recall you not having a podcast last time you were on this podcast?
Correct. We just
that you should host a podcast, and you saying stop it.
yeah. So that was when did we do that? Were we on in like October last year? So yeah, I didn't have a podcast then. We started our podcast in January. My podcast host partner, Aaron Straker, he was a member at my CrossFit gym for many, many years, at least half a decade, in San Diego. So he came out to visit me for a day and get a workout in when he was in Denver. And we took a long walk afterwards, and we were just kind of talking about like what our vision is for ourselves. And one of the things that we both said was that we wanted to do a podcast, and he's always been more focused on the nutrition side of things, and I've been more focused on the training side of things, much like my relationship with Lori as well with Paragon. And so it worked out really, really well, where we have this podcast where he and I can kind of riff off of each other. I can ask him questions about nutrition, and he can ask me questions about training. And then we answer a bunch of questions from Instagram, and we have guests and stuff like that. And we give updates on our own training. So it's actually been a really cool outlet for me, and something that I didn't realize I was going to enjoy so much, because, you know, I really don't enjoy writing captions on Instagram and, you know, blog posts, nobody reads them. So that form of relaying information is kind of dead. And I really like the ability to speak and communicate with people this way. And I feel like it feels a lot more personal for them as well.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, it's always awesome having you on. Thank you again we got you twice now.
No, for sure. I love it. I'm really glad to come talk with you guys. I especially like that you have a slightly different perspective, and that you guys do things like those circuits from Terry Crews and stuff like that. So I hope that your audience gets something out of it or cares a little bit about hypertrophy, because obviously I love to talk about it.
Heck yeah. All right. Thanks.
We'll just get you on at the end of every cycle.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, thanks guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you to the fit heads. If you can rate and review on Apple Podcasts, that helps us out a lot. And we'll see you next week.